Okay, so you guys have sent in some really interesting stuff for today's deep dive. I got to say, some of it's a bit concerning.
Yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
about microplastics, right? But
Right.
this time it's not about, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Oh, yeah.
It's about something a little closer to home.
Yeah.
Our brains.
Right.
So the stuff you guys have sent in suggests that these tiny particles,
Mm-hmm.
these microplastics, are actually getting into our brains.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we really want to understand, what the science is telling us,
Right.
why it matters, what we can do about it. And hopefully we can do all that without, getting too bogged down in the super technical details.
Absolutely. I think we can do that. We have a really interesting, I have to say, a little unsettling piece from Nature Medicine
Yeah.
that details a recent study that actually found microplastics in human brain tissue.
Oh.
And then along with that, we've got this really comprehensive review by researchers at the University of Ottawa and the University of Toronto, which gives us a lot more context about where these microplastics are coming from and what the impact might be.
All right, well, let's jump right into the Nature Medicine study then. The thing that really got me, I have to say, was they found around a spoonful of microplastics. On average, in human brains, a spoonful,
That's wild.
it's a really relatable amount for something that's,
Invisible.
yeah, invisible to the naked eye. And
Yeah.
I think a spoonful is, we can all imagine what that's like.
Right.
But it's just crazy to think that that amount of plastic is in our brains.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is what they found when they looked at brain tissue from people who had been diagnosed with dementia.
Yeah.
The levels of these microplastics were much higher, like
Yeah.
way higher, 3 to 5 times higher.
Right.
So it really makes you wonder, is there a connection here?
I know, it really does, doesn't it?
Could these particles actually be playing a role?
It makes you wonder if there's some sort of, causal link. Yeah. That's the big question, right?
That is the million-dollar question right there.
And that's where that review study that you
Right.
mentioned comes in, right?
Right.
Helping us understand how we're even being exposed to this stuff in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We need to take a step back and say, where's this coming from?
Yeah.
How is it getting into our bodies? And,
Yeah.
what can we do about it?
Yeah, and the review really stresses just how widespread these microplastics are.
It does.
I mean, it's not just like some
Yeah.
kind of faraway environmental problem.
Right.
These tiny bits of plastic they're in our water. They're in the food that we eat. They're even in the air that we breathe.
They are everywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
Yeah. It's a little bit unsettling, and Dr. Nicholas Fabiano from the study, he highlighted this trend. That is really alarming. The concentration of microplastics in human brains seems to have increased dramatically between 2016 and 2024.
Well,
Yeah, so think about that. In just 8 years, we've seen this huge spike in the amount of microplastics that are showing up in human brains.
yeah, and what makes it even more worrying is that increase seems to be happening at the same time as the increase in microplastic pollution in the environment.
Yeah, they're happening in parallel.
Right.
So as we're seeing more and more plastic pollution
Yeah.
in the world, we're also seeing more and more of it in our brains.
So there's like a direct correlation.
It's a pretty tight correlation, yeah.
To see that reflected so quickly in something like our brains,
Yeah.
it's pretty unsettling.
It's worrying, isn't it? Because you think of the brain as being, kind of protected
Yeah.
by the skull and everything. But clearly, these microplastics are getting in there.
And it's not just like a one-to-one thing either. The research actually found that the concentration of these, they call them micro and nanoplastics,
Right, MNPs for short.
MNPs, the concentration of these MNPs in brain tissue
Mm-hmm.
was way higher
Mm-hmm.
than in other major organs.
Much higher. Like the liver,
Yeah.
the kidneys, we're talking 7 to 30 times higher.
That's a huge difference.
It is a massive difference.
But for some reason, the brain seems to be like a magnet
Yeah, it does seem that way.
for these particles.
If they're just accumulating there.
Yeah, so we should be clear as well. This isn't just like random bits of plastic we're talking about.
No.
The sources that you guys sent in, they said that the microplastics found were mostly less than 200 nanometers.
Tiny.
Tiny. And primarily polyethylene,
Right.
which is like the really common plastic used in
Yeah.
shopping bags and
Yeah. Hot
for packaging.
food wrap.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly the stuff we use every day.
Yeah, so not only are they really small, they're also the kind of plastic that's you know.
Everywhere.
Absolutely. It's
But-
ubiquitous.
And it's not just about, you know, where they are in the brain.
Yeah.
It's also about what they might be doing.
Right.
So the research found them in the walls of the, what's it called, the cerebrovascular system? You know, the cerebrovascular system.
Which is basically the network of blood vessels in the brain.
Exactly. All the blood vessels
Okay.
that supply the brain with oxygen and nutrients. And they also found them within the immune cells
Okay. So
in the brain.
that's a problem because these particles are small enough to get past.
That's the really worrying thing. The blood-brain barrier,
Yeah.
which is meant to protect the brain.
Yeah, that kind of like,
Gatekeeper.
yeah, it's like a filter.
Oh.
It's meant to keep harmful stuff out.
Yeah.
And the fact that microplastics can get past it is what's making everyone think
Yeah.
that they might be involved
Yeah.
in neurological problems.
So that brings us back to that big question.
Right.
You know, are these microplastics actually causing things like dementia? Or is it the other way around?
Yeah, or is it possible that
Exactly.
the dementia makes the brain more vulnerable to microplastics?
So it's like a chicken and egg situation.
It's hard to tell what's
Huh.
the cause and what's the effect. Yeah, and at the moment, the research
Yeah.
only shows a link.
Right? Yeah, it just shows that there's a connection.
It doesn't prove that one causes the other.
Exactly. It doesn't mean that one is causing the other.
It could be that the microplastics are actually contributing to the dementia.
Right. Or it could be that the dementia is making it harder
Yeah.
for the brain to get rid of the microplastics.
So more research is needed
Definitely, we need more research
to figure that out.
to untangle that.
But in the meantime,
Yeah.
the review does give us some practical things that
Yeah.
we can do to reduce our exposure.
Which is encouraging.
Right. Yeah.
Because it gives us a sense of agency that we're not just, you know, sitting ducks.
And some of it's really simple stuff.
Oh, yeah. Some of it's really easy to do.
Like the water thing seems to be a big one.
Water is huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
The difference between bottled water
Mm.
and filtered tap water
Oh, yeah.
is massive.
Yeah, Dr. Brandon Liu gave this really crazy statistic. He said that by switching to filtered tap water, you can reduce your microplastic intake by a huge amount, from 90,000 particles a year down to just 4,000.
It's an incredible reduction.
It's a huge difference.
It is.
Makes you think twice about grabbing that plastic water bottle.
It really does.
And Dr. Liu also said that bottled water exposes us to almost as many microplastics as all the other stuff combined.
Yeah, you know, the food we eat, the air we breathe, it's almost as much
Right.
as all of that put together.
So just by switching to tap water, we can make a big difference.
A huge dent. Yeah.
And then there's another thing that I never would have thought of. Those little plastic seals in tea bags.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently those things can release millions of microplastics into your tea
Millions.
every time you make a cup.
Just from one tea bag.
It's crazy.
It's pretty wild.
So maybe switching to loose leaf tea.
Yeah, or tea bags that don't have plastic in them.
Yeah.
You know, there are some out there.
Like a really easy change to make.
It is a simple swap.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the advice that we always hear about,
Yeah.
how we heat up our food.
Yeah, the classic advice.
So heating food
Yeah.
in plastic containers,
Especially in the microwave.
especially in the microwave, yeah, can release a ton of microplastics.
Yeah, the heat seems to make the plastic break down and release those particles into the food.
So it's best to use glass or stainless steel
Exactly.
whenever you can. It's almost like going back to,
I know, it's like what our grandparents did.
yeah, our grandparents' time.
But now we've got a scientific reason
Yeah, we know why.
for doing it.
So our bodies might also have some ways of getting rid of these microplastics.
Yeah, there's some early research suggesting that sweating might help
Okay.
to eliminate some of those plastic compounds.
Okay.
But this is really early research. We need a lot more studies to figure out, you know, how effective this is.
So it might not be the solution.
It's not a magic bullet.
Yeah, but it's
Interesting.
seems
It's a
like-
promising avenue.
yeah, that our bodies might have some natural defenses.
Yeah, some way of fighting back.
This whole thing feels like a bit of a hidden problem, you know?
It does feel like a silent threat.
It's not something that we can see or smell.
Yeah, you can't see it. You can't smell it.
You can't taste it. But it's there.
But it's there.
Dr. David Preeter had a great quote. He said that this might be one of the biggest environmental storms that most people never saw coming.
I think that's a really powerful image.
It really is.
Yeah, it really captures the sense of, the potential scale of this problem.
Yeah, so we really need more research.
Absolutely.
We need to know things like, what are the safe levels of exposure?
Yeah, what's the threshold
Yeah.
before it starts to become dangerous?
Right, and what are the long-term consequences
Yeah, what are the long-term effects
of having these microplastics
build up in our bodies?
on our health?
Yeah, and specifically, we need more studies on humans.
Yes, human studies are
You
crucial.
really understand the link
Yeah.
between microplastics and chronic health problems. Right, because we can do studies on animals, but
Yeah.
ultimately, we need to know what's happening in humans.
So let's talk more specifically about the neurological effects.
Okay.
The review highlighted how these microplastics, once they're in the brain,
Mm.
can actually cause harm.
Yeah, and I think the most concerning thing is that they could be contributing to inflammation
Okay.
and what's called oxidative stress in the brain.
Oxidative stress is basically,
But there's like an imbalance?
yeah, it's an imbalance that can damage cells over time.
Okay. So it's kind of like
Now think of it like rust
rough.
forming on your brain cells.
Wow.
It's a bit of a simplified analogy,
Yeah.
but it gets the point across.
Yeah, so it's not just that. The microplastics are physically there.
Right.
It's that they might be actively damaging the brain.
Exactly.
And we know that chronic inflammation in the brain is linked to
Linked to all sorts of things like Alzheimer's,
Parkinson's.
Parkinson's, cognitive decline, all sorts of neurological problems.
So it's really worrying.
It is a major concern that these microplastics might be making those conditions worse.
Yeah, because we know that higher levels of microplastics are found in the brains of people with dementia.
Yeah.
So it's possible that the microplastics are actually accelerating the neuroinflammation and the neurological decline.
So we need to figure out exactly how these tiny particles are interacting with our brain cells.
Right. How are they affecting the cells?
Yeah.
How are they disrupting the neural pathways? How are they influencing cognitive function?
Yeah, and the fact that this review was published in Brain Medicine really tells us
Yeah.
that this is a serious concern.
Exactly. This isn't just, some fringe theory.
Yeah.
This is mainstream science.
Okay, so the takeaway
Yeah.
from today's deep dive
Yeah.
is that microplastics are not just out there in the environment.
Right.
They're in our brains.
They're inside us.
And that the levels seem to be much higher
Mm-hmm.
in people with dementia. And while we don't know for sure if there's a cause and effect, there are some things we can do to reduce our exposure, like switching to filtered tap water.
Yeah, that's a big one. Choosing loose leaf tea. Using glass or stainless steel for cooking.
Yeah, all really simple stuff
Simple changes.
that can make a big difference.
That can have a big impact.
It's so important to remember that the research is still ongoing.
Yeah, we're still learning about this.
We're at the beginning, really, of understanding this problem. But what we know so far is pretty worrying.
It is concerning.
So here's a final thought for you to think about.
Mm.
We know that these microplastics are everywhere.
They are everywhere.
They're in our environment,
Yeah.
and now we know they're even in our brains.
Right.
So what other ways might they be affecting our bodies?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are we not seeing yet?
What are the questions that we should be asking now that we know they're there? And what research do we need to do
Yeah.
to really understand the long-term effects of these tiny invaders?
Yeah, it's a whole new area of research
Yeah.
that's just opening up.
Food for thought.
Food for thought.
Thanks for joining us
Thanks for listening.
for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.